Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host Shemeka Michelle. Will did not make the trip. We were hoping this would be the first remote where all of us are together, but this is a tremendous conference. We're coming to you from the Old Overland Conference, and to talk about why we're here and the wonderful things we're doing, we have a frequent guest, previous guest, Jason Riley here from the Manhattan Institute, one of the organizers. So, Jason, welcome.
Thank you for having me. You didn't get a Will, but you did get a Riley.
There we go.
Yeah. All right.
I'm almost there. So, can you tell everyone the importance of why you all, the great organizers who put together this conference, why you felt it was important to do it?
Because we want to have some honest, frank, open discussions about racial inequality, social inequality, economic inequality in this country that we don't think are taking place. We think the prevailing narrative out there is very one-sided. We think there are different ways of looking at these issues. And we thought we'd put together some academics, some practitioners, some journalists like myself, and have some open conversations about what's driving these differences and how best to go about narrowing these differences. So that was really the point of the conference. There was a similar conference held more than 40 years ago called the Black Alternatives Conference. It was held at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. It was organized by a scholar named Thomas Sowell at the Hoover Institution. Sowell is now in his 90s. Mm-hmm. And we thought, given the deep divisions in this country today, along race, along class, along politics, it was time to host another such convention, and so that's why we put this together.
And one of the important things about that, you mentioned the previous conference, when we had you on before, you were talking about your book, Maverick, and talking about Tom Sowell. And one of the interesting things you talked about here is the fact that the same issues they were talking about then, we're talking about now. And Shemeka and I, we talk about that constantly on the podcast. We've had John McWhorter. We pulled an article from 20 years ago he wrote and said, you said that these were the problems and you said this is what we should do to address it. 20 years later, has anything changed? So have many things, obviously there have been gains, but as a whole, the complaints, the things we're working on, the gaps and the discrepancies, have they changed since 1980?
There have been changes. There has been some progress in some areas. There has been some retrogression in other areas. Since 1980, we elected a black president in this country twice. That's not nothing. But in terms of closing these gaps, between the races on education, on income, on crime, on employment. We have not seen the gains that I think we all would like to see. And so I think what we've been trying, that's evidence that it hasn't been working. And maybe we need to rethink how we approach these problems. And I think one of the problems is that we haven't put a lot of thought into doing that. We put more thought into doubling down on what we've been trying, saying, oh, it just means we need more resources, or we just need more time for this to work, and so forth. And as you say, it's been 40 years, it's been 20 years, it's been a long time, so maybe we need to fundamentally rethink some of our approaches, and that's part of the conversation we wanted to get started at this conference.
So, Shemeka, what do you think about that? We talk a lot about, obviously, race and culture, but I get a sense that you are getting to the point that you think that the way it's being communicated is not helpful. It's a waste. You seem to be really bothered by people not being able to tell the truth. That's one of the things people love about the podcast, is that Shemeka's always telling the truth. So what do you think about how we're approaching, what you've seen that may have been different about what some of the speakers here have said?
First of all, let me say, to know that it was 40 years ago and 1980 was 40 years ago, I'm like, it just shows that how old I am.
How old is that? No.
And I'm like, oh gosh, that's a reminder. I'm thankful to be here. Mm-hmm. But I do think that it has gotten better. And I think that's one of the things that we have to acknowledge. A lot of times I feel like, especially on the left, they act as if we are still living in the times when you couldn't go out and vote, when they had water hoses or dogs or when, and so that's one thing that I make sure that I let my kids know. You didn't go through what your great grandmother went through.
Right.
And so you have to acknowledge that there have been huge changes and we've moved forward so much, and you can actually pick up the ball and keep running forward. And so I do think there have been great changes that we do have to acknowledge. We don't have to keep singing "We shall overcome." In so many ways, we have overcome, and I think we will continue to. I want to say I appreciate you all for putting this together and continuing to run with Thomas Sowell's vision, because it's been a joy for me just to see so many men, and especially Black men, who actually, because in so many circles, it's like they've kind of just checked out. And so to see so many Black men, it's like a sigh of relief. I'm used to going to places where it's predominantly women running the show. They're in charge. It's their way or no way. But here it is. We had men come together to put this on, to want to find solutions for the Black community. And for me, that makes me be able to exhale a little bit.
I'm so appreciative of you bringing that up, because when we were putting this together, my wife said to me, you need to get some women, more women involved on the panels or as speakers. You need more gender balance here. It had never occurred to me, but I hadn't thought about it the way that you think about it, that this was somehow showcasing the engagement of Black men in a way that you don't often see in these Black communities where women are taking the lead. So I appreciate that observation. I did want to say one thing. You're right, Blacks have made progress. And as Thomas Sowell said, although Blacks have made progress, whites haven't stood still. And so that's why we still see gaps.
Right.
And that's the problem. And the other problem I think we've seen is we have this racial grievance industry in America that's only gotten larger and stronger and more powerful and more controlling of the narrative. That hasn't gone away. And I think that in and of itself is a problem. The civil rights movement has turned into an industry, if not a racket. And that is what we are seeing today. So you have a lot of pretenders out there who don't want to acknowledge that anything has gotten any better.
Right.
Because it could put them out of business. It could make them irrelevant. It could make it more difficult for them to raise money for their cause, to admit that the problems of 50 years ago are not the problems of today. And that's a big problem.
Well, let me ask you about this, because part of it is you have some brilliant minds here, not just the organizers and you and Shelby Steele, Glenn Lowry, and who am I believing? Ian, my buddy Ian Rowe.
Yeah.
But also the people on the panel. I mean, everybody in the room, even the people who aren't on stage, and they have unique approaches, different ideas. It's not like this is some conservative event where everybody thinks the same way. But one thing that I want to put this one to you and see what you think about that. One of the things, as I listen to people here and I'm thinking, you talk about the grievous industry. We all know it's there. A couple names have come up. I won't mention them. But here's an approach. What do you think about this? Maybe we're never going to change their minds, even though I question whether they really believe the things that they're saying, but they're making money doing it. So maybe we should start to adjust and not address, you have to address some of the things they say because it's foolish, but not spend so much time addressing what they do, but attacking the people who make the grievous industry, economically sound for them. So they're not paying themselves, right? So we should attack the people who and guilt and shame the people who are funding them for this nonsense.
That is one approach. I mean, we live in a free market society, and maybe these folks are just responding to incentives. There's a market out there for blaming Black problems on white people.
Right.
And so if there is money to be made, someone is going to go make some money doing that. I think we can do two things. One, we can encourage people to look at the evidence, not the intentions of policies that are put in place, but what has actually happened. Educate people about what's happened in the past when these policies have been put in place, what's been promised, and then what actually happened, what came to pass. Did it work out, as the proponent said, or not? Point to the evidence, point to the data. And a lot of the people we invited to this conference, that's what they deal in.
Right.
Data, evidence, logic, not emotion, not what we think should happen or hope will happen, but what has actually happened. Where is the evidence? And I think, by and large, Americans are rational people, and if you can point out what's worked and what hasn't worked to them and make your case, you've got a good chance of persuading them. One problem we have is we don't control the narrative. The left is largely in control of the media. They're largely in control of academia. They're largely in control of the intellectual prizes that are the genius grants that are handed out, and that allows them to control the narrative, regardless of whether what they're saying makes any sense or has been proven true or false. And so there is a messaging issue, and I think it's been exacerbated with social media, where you can take an incident that's rare, give it a lot of attention, and make it seem like it happens all the time.
Right.
And so, yeah, there are some challenges there, but I think I do have some abiding faith in the American people to look at the facts, look at the evidence, if we can get that in front of them.
Well, I won't take too much of your time, so I'll end with that. So what do you think the biggest takeaway is going to be from this? I mean, obviously, we're not even done. It's just been completely phenomenal. But what do you want people to walk away from this thinking and learning?
What I'm really hoping is not so much that the people here get the message, but that this conference gets some attention in the media. And what I want that attention to demonstrate is that, and I will name some names, that your Nicole Hannah-Joneses, your Ta-Nehisi Coateses, your Cornel West, your Ibram Kendis are not the last word, the final word on these subjects. They do not represent black thought or black thinking or on these issues. And there are other ways to think about these things. And I want people to know there is a diversity of opinion among black people and among minorities in terms of how to approach these problems. And I think if we can get that out there and that across, we will have accomplished something here.